Hey guys, it's Bobby. Today I'm going to show you how you can turn something as explosive and destructive as anger, and I'm going to show you how to turn it into a superpower. Now, for me, anger has it's consistently been, at least in my younger years and up into my young adulthood, it was always been an issue. I was always kind of an explosive guy, uh, easily, I guess, tempered, and it never really served me well, and it never really became clear to me that it was a problem, although I knew to an extent that it was, but it never really became clear to me that it was a real problem until I started seeing it in my son. And so, a short story. I One day I was picking up the kids from school. Picked up the kids from school. I had to make a quick stop at the post office, and so typical conversation in the back of the car or in the car while we're riding to the post office. How was your day? Tell me about school. What did you learn? All that kind of stuff. Everything was good. Very light, mood in the car. Everybody was in a pretty good mood for the most part. And we get to the post office, and I said, hang tight. Sit out here for about 3 minutes. I got to just drop this package off in the post office. So I hop out of the car, grab the package out of the back, and I go into the post office. I wasn't gone, 3, 4 minutes, 5 minutes at the most. I come back in, and when you walk into a space and you know that something's happened just by the energy, right? So when I got back in the car, it was very evident something happened. The mood was very different. The energy was very different. And I looked at my daughter in the back, and I could see on her face that she was hurt and angry. I looked at my son in the back seat behind me. I could see that he was hurt, angry, and he looked ashamed. There was just a look of shame on his face. And so I looked to the older daughter sitting in the passenger seat. I said, "What happened?" And she proceeded to tell me that my son had said something to my daughter, and I won't repeat it or share it, but it was a very hurtful comment. And I said, "Son, why did you say that?" And he said, "Dad, I was angry." And I could tell he was angry. And in that moment, fortunately, I was just on the way to pick the kids up from school. I had watched a podcast. I was already kind of in a good teacher and dad mode, because it's a good teaching opportunity. Because part of me was upset as well. But I was very aware of myself at that moment. And so it was an opportunity for me to teach. And so my son likes cars. And so as we pulled out of the parking lot, I said, "Son, what is this in front of me?" And he said, "The dashboard?" I said, "Yeah, it's the dashboard." I said, "What's on the dashboard?" He said, "Gauges and whatnot." And I said, "Well, what else is on the dashboard?" They said, "Lights and stuff." And so I pointed to one. I said, "What is that light?" And it was the check engine light. And I said, "What is that light right there?" And he said, "I don't know." I said, "That's the check engine light." I said, "It's not on right now." I said, "But if it were on, what does that mean?" And "I don't know. You got to check your engine." I said, "Exactly. It means there's something going on inside of my vehicle that I need to investigate. Something going on inside of my vehicle that I investigate." I said, "So would it make sense as we're driving down the road, if my check engine light came on, would it make sense for me to start ramming these cars next to me, rear end the car in front of me, slam on my brakes so the guy behind me rear ends me and take off and driving completely recklessly?" He's like, "Well, no, that doesn't make sense." I said, "Neither does hurting people when you're angry." I said, "Your anger is no different than that check engine light. It's telling you that there's something going on inside of you that you need to investigate. There may have been things that triggered you, but there's something going on inside of you that you need to investigate. Therefore, it doesn't make sense for you to start saying things to your sister. It doesn't make sense for you to start attacking other people. It just doesn't." I said, anger, all emotions for that are just indicators that there's something going on inside of you that you need to investigate. So it was a good teaching opportunity. He got it. He got the point. All the kids got it at that point. And I think ultimately what it does is it shows us the problem. The problem that we all have, especially with anger, is because it's such a consuming emotion and it comes on so quickly that we completely go unconscious and we just become reactive. And I think you can probably relate to that. We get so reactive to the point that we almost become somebody else, right? And so I know for me, when my anger, when it comes on, it does come on just like that. It is a rush of emotion, and my vision gets focused, so almost to the point where it's almost like attack mode, and obviously we're not going to build relationships and solve problems in attack mode. We'll solve a problem, or there'll be a solution, but it won't be the solution that we want, right? And so that's the problem. So the question is, okay, so what's the solution? So how do we solve this problem of this overwhelming emotion that consumes us and makes us become someone else? Well, there's a couple ways. In the heat of the moment, when it's consuming, the first thing you have to do is simply just be silent. You're not going to solve anything. You're likely not going to be able to put yourself in a state of mind to where you can say or do anything to solve anything. So just be silent. And if you need to remove yourself from the scene, from the situation, I need a break. Let me walk away from this. I'll come back and we'll have a conversation. But it's usually not 0 to 100. Usually you're building up. So there is a period of time building up. So in the period of time building up, when you become aware that I'm getting angry, you need to ask yourself this one question. So the first one is silence, when you're in the heat of the moment and you need to just leave. Silence. The second one is when you feel it building up and you make that awareness, you observe yourself getting angry. Then that question that you have to ask yourself is, what does love look like in this? Because chances are, whatever you're angry at, whether it's another person, or even if it's you just get cut off in traffic, something as simple as that, because anger in general is rooted in injustice. You've been wronged, you've been accused, you've been stopped from accomplishing your goal. There's some level of injustice. And so what does love look like in that? Well, what does God's love look like in injustice? Well, love is forgiveness, right? So ultimately it's forgiving whatever it is that is offended you or is injustice. And if there's something that needs to be made right, then it's made right righteously, not self-righteously. So what is the question that you ask yourself as you feel the emotion building, as you notice and become aware of yourself getting angry? The question is, what does love look like in this? And literally try and answer that question. What would love look like in this? And the third option is after the fact. After let's say you weren't able to stop it or mitigate it, or let's say you were even, and after the fact, I want you to reflect on the emotion and on the moment and think to yourself, because it all comes from a belief. The question you need to ask after the fact is, when you're reflecting, is, what is the belief behind that emotion? And you might have to start with the thought. You've noticed the emotion. What is the thought that I was having, or what are the thoughts that I was having, building up that emotion? And then what is the belief behind that thought and that emotion? Once you can come to and articulate what the belief is, then you can ask yourself the next question, which is very simple. Is it true? And if it's not always true 100% of the time, the chances are it's just not true. Okay? So, in the heat of the moment, silence. Leading up to, what does love look like? After the fact, what's the belief behind it? Do you remember that? Okay. But there's a bigger problem here. There's a bigger problem behind not just anger, but living in a way in which all of our emotions are our driver in life, when they're supposed to be indicators. So if we're talking about lust, we're talking about anger, we're talking about greed, we're talking about all of these emotions that drive us, and we react and we respond constantly to whatever the emotion is at the moment. They're not designed, and we are not designed to be emotionally driven. Those emotions are indicators, just like on the dashboard. They're indicators of what's going on inside of you. And so when you pay attention to them in that way, now mind you, those indicators, all of the emotions belong to the body. And if you watch in my other videos, then you know that I teach that the body belongs to the learned self. The learned self is that self that you have learned to be in life. It's not who you are. It's the self that's going to pass when you pass. And behind that learned self is the mind, where all the beliefs are planted, right? And so behind where all the beliefs are planted is the created self. The created self is very much the self that is created in the image of God. It's who we truly are. And so if we can begin to consistently practice, and as I show in some of my videos, practice living in today as the created self, then we become observers of our emotions rather than being the person that's consumed by the emotions, right? And so the bigger problem is we live as emotionally reactive people, generally speaking, until you become aware. Once you become aware that you're aware, then you can, hey, I'm noticing myself getting angry. Take a step back and pay attention. Don't shut it down, but just pay attention to that anger, pay attention to that lust, pay attention to that feeling, whatever the emotion is, that even happiness. Pay attention to what it is that you're feeling. Allow yourself to feel it and go back and ask yourself, what's the belief? What's the belief? And so the bigger problem is we live as emotionally driven creatures, but we're not. We are humans, we are persons, and therefore we have an intellect and an awareness of ourselves and our state of being, not like any other creature out there, right? We're special. We're made in the image of God, right? So with that said, the bigger problem is, how do we learn to live as we were created to live versus living the way we're currently living, which is full of emotion and consumed by the emotion? Well, it's a practice, and it's a daily practice. And for me, it's a morning practice where I begin to meditatively pray and get myself in that meditative state, and I pray and I become aware of myself as the created self and become aware of my emotions. And I begin to practice, especially when I was working on my own anger. I began to practice putting myself back in those situations, because the body doesn't know the difference between what is imagined and what is real. You can imagine a scenario and get your body all worked up, whatever it is. And I know you know that's true. Whether it's lust, or whether it's anger, or whether it's anxiety, or whether it's depression, if you sit there and dwell on something long enough, your body responds, right? So the body doesn't know the difference between what is imagined and what is real. And so in that meditative state, you can put yourself back in that state, in that experience, and then you can be able to respond differently and be able to start training yourself to respond differently, because all you have to do is teach the body, relearn it, how to respond to anger differently. Okay? So there's the solution for the bigger problem, the morning practice of resetting yourself and rehearsing how you should be responding to these emotions. Not being reactive, but being aware and responding from a place of love. Because if we're created in the image of God, and God is love, therefore we are love, right? And so if any of this is clicking with you, if you can relate with any of this, leave a comment down below. And if you want to work with me, I am starting to work with people one-on-one. If you want to work with me, I'm also going to put a link in the description for an opportunity for you to call me, and we can connect from there. It's kind of an overcast day out. The wind is blowing. It feels good outside. I got some work to do. So with that, I just want to say, peace be with you.